Do you feel like something's off with your health, but your doctor says that all of your labs look normal, and you might not even be overweight? Metabolic syndrome could be to blame, even if you look seemingly healthy on the outside. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in today's video, is 8 signs that you have metabolic syndrome. Even if you're not overweight, even if all of your lab tests look normal, we're going to be breaking down what metabolic syndrome is, what it actually means to have it, what the cause of it is, and finally, what you can do about it. Hi, I'm Kate, a nutritionist who specializes in insulin resistance, weight loss, and blood sugar control. I have helped hundreds of clients with metabolic syndrome regain their health and reverse this condition. And if you have metabolic syndrome, if there's something off with your health, even if you look healthy, as I said before, this isn't something to take lightly. It's not just something to brush under the rug. Because if you do have metabolic syndrome, this increases your risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and many other diseases. So the earlier you can recognize that you have it and take steps to improve and reverse it, the better off your health is going to be both short-term and long-term. Now, we're going to get into exactly what the criteria is for metabolic syndrome, but you don't have to be overweight to have it. I know when we think metabolic health, automatically our minds jump to either being overweight or being a normal body weight. If you have poor metabolic health, we assume that means you're overweight, but that's not always the case. There are a lot of normal weight people who do have metabolic syndrome. But the good news is that because it is a metabolic condition that's caused by diet and lifestyle, it can be entirely reversed. And like I said, when you do that, you're going to reduce your disease risk significantly. So what is metabolic syndrome? Now, when we talk about syndromes, and I feel like a lot of people don't know this, it actually means a cluster of symptoms. So it's not really a disease per se. It just means you have some of the symptoms that are associated with it. So when we're talking about metabolic syndrome, there are 5 main symptoms. And to have metabolic syndrome, you have to have 3 out of the 5. So the first one is going to be a large waist circumference. The second one is going to be high blood sugar. The third one is high triglycerides. The fourth one, high HDL. And the fifth one, high blood pressure. But there are other signs as well, and that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video, because metabolic health goes beyond these lab markers. The first one is that you are constantly battling cravings, and especially for sugar and carbohydrates. Now, this happens when you have blood sugar dysregulation and insulin resistance. Both of these go undiagnosed a lot of the time. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you have high blood sugar, or at least not yet. But if your blood sugar isn't being managed properly by the body, even if you don't have high blood sugar, this is a sign of metabolic syndrome. It's a sign that something in your metabolism isn't working properly. We experience these cravings, and they can be really intense when our blood sugar is going up and down dramatically throughout the day. Your body gets stuck in this cycle where it thinks it needs quick energy, and that's when these cravings happen. The second sign is that you have belly fat or a puffy midsection. Now, I spoke earlier about how one of the main symptoms of metabolic syndrome is if you have a large waist circumference. But even if it doesn't meet the minimum threshold for metabolic syndrome, if you find you carry a lot of weight around your midsection, if maybe you consider yourself what is known as skinny fat, even if you have a normal BMI, this can be a sign of metabolic syndrome. It means that you have a visceral fat buildup, which is caused by metabolic syndrome. And that's why eventually, when your waist does meet that minimum threshold, that will be one of the main symptoms of metabolic syndrome. The fourth one is skin tags, and this surprises a lot of people. Now, we're going to get more into what causes metabolic syndrome and why metabolic syndrome causes these symptoms in a little bit. But skin tags are caused by high insulin levels in the body. Now, insulin is a hormone that plays a big role in our metabolism. It helps shuttle excess sugar from our bloodstream to the cells in our body that need it. So anytime our blood sugar goes up, insulin is there to help control it and bring it back down to baseline, and also to fuel our cells. But insulin is also a growth hormone. So when we have it in large amounts in the body, it causes growth. This is why, and this is kind of a tangent, insulin levels go up when women are pregnant, because they are growing a baby. And this is why women will have gestational diabetes, because their insulin has went up during pregnancy. But When you have metabolic syndrome, you have higher than normal baseline levels of insulin in the body, and this can cause growths on your skin, including skin tags. Now, when I'm talking about skin tags, I'm talking about little fleshy bits that usually appear around the neck, in the armpits, in the groin. Sometimes they can occur on eyelids, and it's a misconception that skin tags are caused by friction. A lot of people will go to their doctor or their dermatologist and they can have them removed. But if you're removing skin tags this way and not addressing the root cause, which is the high insulin, then they're just going to come back. And the skin tags themselves, they're benign. They won't cause any problems for you. But the cause of them, that's what you should be concerned about. So it shouldn't just be about removing them for aesthetics. It should be about addressing the root cause of them. That way they won't come back, and then your metabolic health is also going to be better. The fourth one is brain fog and trouble concentrating. And again, this comes down to blood sugar dysregulation. Our brain is super sensitive to swings in blood sugar, and we can experience the side effect years before fasting blood sugar goes up and we see the other main symptoms of metabolic syndrome. But before we continue, I just wanted to tell you about today's sponsor, Good Idea Drinks. One of the simplest ways to improve blood sugar control, especially after meals, is with Good Idea Drinks. This is a sparkling water infused with clinically tested ingredients like amino acids and chromium that help reduce post-meal blood sugar spikes. I drink Good Idea before carb-heavy meals or when I'm eating out, and I recommend it to all of my clients who are working on reversing insulin resistance and better controlling their blood sugar. Good Idea is available in the United States, and you can save 10% off your order when you use code KATE at checkout. Head to healthcoachkate.com/good idea to learn more. The next sign is hormonal imbalances. And we see this in both men and women. When you have metabolic syndrome as a woman, this increases your risk of PCOS. This increases your risk of having an irregular cycle. And this all comes down to the hormones, one of which being insulin, which we just spoke about, being out of balance. High insulin and insulin resistance is the key driver behind PCOS. Now, PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. And again, like metabolic syndrome, it is the name for a cluster of symptoms. So women who have PCOS, they have to have 2 out of the 3 main symptoms. Symptom number 1 is an irregular period. Symptom number 2 is ovarian cysts. And symptom number 3 is high male hormones. And the driver behind all of these is high insulin levels. I won't get into PCOS too much in today's video, but if you are a woman who knows you struggle with hormonal imbalances, then you might have metabolic syndrome as a result. I'm going to link to another video on PCOS up above that you can check out afterwards if you want to know more about that specifically. Now, the final sign we're going to talk about is if you have trouble losing weight, if it feels almost impossible no matter what you do. Now, I know we're talking about signs that you have metabolic syndrome even if you're not overweight, but if you have tried to lose weight in the past, maybe you're not quite overweight or maybe you're on the cusp and you've tried to lose like 5-10 pounds and found it almost impossible. This is also a sign, hello Maisie, of metabolic syndrome. And this is because when you have metabolic syndrome, your body is less metabolically flexible. It is relying a lot on burning carbohydrates for energy, and it's not good at using fat for fuel. Bless you. Big sneeze. So if any of those struck a chord with you, you might have metabolic syndrome. But now let's get into what actually causes it. And we're going to start off by talking about how metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance are actually the same thing. Now, I mentioned insulin several times throughout this video, and that is because it is the key driver, well, specifically high insulin and insulin resistance is the key driver behind metabolic syndrome, behind the symptoms associated with it. And because it's the cause, it is also the answer. A fun fact, or maybe not a fun fact, is that metabolic syndrome used to actually be called insulin resistance syndrome. I don't know, somewhere along the line, they rebranded it because of all the metabolic issues that it causes. And I guess it was, I don't know why they rebranded it. But anyways, the fact that it used to be called insulin resistance syndrome just goes to show how related they are. But the disconnect we now have between the two, I think, does more harm than good, because if we know that metabolic syndrome is caused by insulin resistance, we can start to address insulin resistance and take control of it. And I think that's really empowering for a lot of people to know, because, like I said, metabolic syndrome, a syndrome just means a group of symptoms. And if we just think that all of those symptoms aren't related or we're not sure what is connecting them, that's not helpful. So if we go back to the main symptoms of metabolic syndrome, number one is a large waist circumference. The reason this is a symptom of metabolic syndrome is because high insulin levels and insulin resistance cause us to store more fat in our midsection as visceral fat. Now, there are two types of fat that we can store on our body. There's visceral fat and there's subcutaneous. Subcutaneous is that squishy fat, and it can be stored basically anywhere on your body. It is really benign. It's basically just stored energy, which all of us need some level of. Of course, you can have too much subcutaneous fat and then you're going to be overweight. But then there's visceral fat, and this type of fat is inflammatory. We only store it around our midsection. It gets stored around our organs, and this is what will eventually lead to like a protruding belly, what is known as a beer belly. And this type of fat is hard. And the reason that we store visceral fat is because our insulin levels are high. Now, remember that I said earlier that insulin is a growth hormone, and this is also one of the things that it grows. The second and third main signs of metabolic syndrome are high triglycerides and low HDL. So these are cholesterol markers, and they basically mean that our metabolism isn't working properly. Now, you might have noticed that LDL and total cholesterol isn't associated with metabolic syndrome at all. And that's because both of these aren't actually good markers of metabolic health. Triglycerides and HDL are, no matter if LDL is high or low, or if total cholesterol is high or low. And I think it's funny that there is such an emphasis in general on LDL and total cholesterol being high, when with things like this, with metabolic syndrome, we see that there is no association to them. However, having metabolic syndrome significantly increases your risk of heart disease and stroke. So there is some connection, but we just completely skip over LDL and cholesterol when it comes to metabolic syndrome because it's not connected. And I think that just goes to show that looking at these numbers is a bit irrelevant. If your LDL is high, but your triglycerides are in a good range and your HDL is high as well, you're in a good spot. Don't focus on LDL because you're just going to be focusing on changing something that doesn't really correlate with your health. The next main symptom is high blood pressure. And again, this is highly correlated with insulin resistance. Now, there are other reasons why your blood pressure might be high, but having hypertension or chronically high blood pressure 90% of the time is caused by insulin resistance. Now, of course, our blood pressure can fluctuate throughout the day. Caffeine can cause our blood pressure to go up. Exercise can cause our blood pressure to go up. Salt can cause our blood pressure to go up. But when this happens, it's an acute reaction. It only happens for a short duration. And this isn't an issue, especially with things like exercise and salt. A short increase in blood pressure isn't a bad thing. It's when it's chronically high that it's an issue. And when it's chronically high, most of the time, this is caused by insulin resistance. And the final main symptom is high fasting blood sugar. Insulin resistance starts years before our fasting blood sugar starts to go up. And as I mentioned before, insulin, one of its roles is to take excess sugar from our bloodstream to our cells in our body. They need it for energy. And this is totally normal. Like, we all need insulin in order to be metabolically healthy and to function properly. People who don't create insulin or don't create enough of it, this is when we see type 1 diabetes, and that's when they have to inject insulin, because without it, their blood sugar would just keep going up, and that can be extremely dangerous and even deadly. So when our blood sugar is constantly spiking, when we're eating a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of sugar, insulin is trying to control our blood sugar and keep it at baseline. So it's taking the sugar out of our bloodstream, trying to bring it to our cells. But what ends up happening when we overconsume sugar and carbohydrates is our cells are already full with all of the energy they can take, because our bodies can only store a limited amount of carbohydrates as energy, sugar as energy. They can basically store unlimited fat, which is why we gain weight. Fat is stored energy, but there's only a limited amount of carbohydrates they can store. So once our cells are filled with all the sugar they can take, that's when they start resisting the actions of insulin. So they start kind of turning insulin away and saying, nope, we're full. we can't take anymore. And then your body realizes that your blood sugar is still elevated and it releases more insulin as a result. And that insulin tries again to get your cells to take the sugar. And this rise in insulin is able to keep your blood sugar in check for a period of time, 5, 10, even 15 years. And that's why you can have insulin resistance and not yet have high fasting blood sugar. But eventually, the excess insulin isn't going to be able to keep up and your fasting blood sugar will start to creep up. And that's when you will have this high blood sugar symptom. But like I said, because you can be insulin resistant up to 15 years before your fasting blood sugar starts to go up, this can mean you still have insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and have normal blood sugar. So what is the solution here? If metabolic syndrome, if insulin resistance are caused by high insulin levels, the solution is lowering your insulin, because when your insulin goes down, this allows your cells to become more sensitive to insulin once again. And when they become more sensitive, then they're taking in excess sugar as they should, everything's working properly, and your metabolic health improves. And because a lot of the associated symptoms are caused by high insulin levels, when you bring that insulin down, the symptoms will start to improve and can even go away entirely. So if you've been paying attention throughout this video, I'm sure you've seen a little bit of a trend, how everything is connected here, how blood sugar, insulin, weight gain are all linked. So if you're trying to bring your insulin levels down, it starts with what you eat, because this is what has the biggest impact on our blood sugar. Yes, things like exercise, stress, sleep can impact our blood sugar as well, but diet really is the biggest contributor. The first thing you're going to want to do is to prioritize protein at every meal. And I start with protein because out of the 3 macronutrients, carbohydrates, fat, and protein is the most important. There is a minimum amount that we need every single day in order for our bodies to function properly, in order to maintain our tissue, in order to maintain our muscles, in order for our hormones to function properly. Because when it comes to carbohydrates and fat, their main role in the body is energy. Carbohydrates are a quick source of energy, and fat is more of a long-term source of energy. But with protein, it's not an energy source. It has other roles in the body. When you eat enough protein at your meals, when you center your meals around protein and kind of build them from there, this ensures that you're getting enough, number one, but it also helps with hunger and satiety. Because a lot of the times when we're still hungry after a meal, it's because we didn't eat enough protein. So aim for 30 grams of quality protein at every meal, ideally animal protein, things like meat, fish, seafood, eggs, even dairy is great. Get at least 30 grams at every meal, and especially 30 grams at your first meal. Even just doing this alone, you're going to see improvements very quickly. Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is to cut out processed carbs and processed sugars. Carbohydrates are the macronutrient that spikes blood sugar and requires the most insulin. When we eat carbohydrates, even if they're complex carbs, they are broken down into sugar, and this is what causes our blood sugar to go up. Now, depending on how processed they are, this will cause our blood sugar to go up more rapidly or more gradually. So the more processed, the more our blood sugar is going to go up all at once, the more quickly, and the more insulin that's going to be needed all at once. The first step here should be cutting out processed carbs, processed sugar, because these are digested rapidly and it's going to cause this spike and it's going to require a lot of insulin, which is what we're trying to avoid. So if you can cut these out and even just stick to whole food carbs, that's going to make a big difference. If you want to take it one step further, you can try to reduce your carb intake in general. But honestly, if you cut out the refined carbs and sugar, you're going to see a big difference. And especially ones that are in liquid form, because these are digested even more rapidly. So I'm talking things like pop and juice. Even juice with no added sugar, there's still a lot of natural sugar in it. Now, another really effective strategy for improving blood sugar control and reducing our need for insulin is exercise. And I'm not talking about doing some big, huge exercise routine, even just going for a 10-15 minute walk after meals. This allows your body to use the sugar and the energy from that meal immediately. And there's going to be a more gradual or maybe even no blood sugar spike. And the really cool thing about exercise is that when we're moving our bodies, our cells can actually take in glucose without insulin. So this is why exercise is so beneficial for insulin resistance, for metabolic syndrome, for weight loss in general. But you need to be doing the right type of exercise. So not intense chronic cardio. I'm talking about, like I said, walking after meals and resistance training. And the next thing you can do is to use targeted supplements that help to control blood sugar. Now, this video is sponsored by Good Idea Drinks, and I think these are an amazing tool. They've been clinically proven to lower blood sugar spikes because they improve insulin sensitivity. So if you drink half a can before you eat a meal that you know is going to be high in carbohydrates, this will allow your cells to take in the sugar and the carbohydrates from that meal and use them for energy more efficiently. You're going to see less of a blood sugar spike, less insulin is going to be needed. And this is a really, really simple hack. Good Idea drinks have 0 calories. They're lightly carbonated. They taste delicious. So this is something you can add to your routine rather than take away. That makes a big, big difference. And the final thing you can do is to incorporate some intermittent fasting into your routine. Now, this doesn't have to be extreme, even just fasting for 12 hours a day. So finishing your last meal at 8 p.m. and not eating again until 8 a.m. can make a really big difference. This is basically, well, when you're fasting, you are in a low insulin state because obviously no energy is coming in and your body doesn't need to be producing insulin in order to control your blood sugar. More time in a fasted state means your cells have more time to become insulin sensitive again. Now, of course, there is a tipping point here. You can overfast and that can cause problems, especially if you're a woman. Honestly, like a 12, 14, 16-hour fasting window every day, I find is very manageable for most people and can be extremely impactful. So in summary, you don't have to wait for a diagnosis to know you have metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance. If you have the signs that we spoke about in today's video, then this should be a bit of a wake-up call. And I don't say that to scare you. A lot of people think they're healthy because they're not overweight, but they are experiencing some other side effects that they don't realize are related and that could get worse over time. And the good news is that metabolic syndrome completely reversible. Yes, some people are more genetically predisposed to it than others, as is the case with insulin resistance. But just because you're genetically predisposed to something doesn't mean you're automatically going to develop it. Genetics load the gun, diet and lifestyle pull the trigger. But anyways, guys, I hope you found this podcast episode helpful. Let me know in the comment section down below if you've been diagnosed with metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance, and if there's anything you've done about it so far, anything that's worked, anything that hasn't, or maybe this has been totally eye-opening for you and you had no idea about any of this before, let me know down below. And before you go, remember to check out Good Idea Drinks. That link will be in the description box down below. Oh, and one last thing before you actually go, make sure you're subscribed if you aren't already, because I'm posting videos on weight loss, insulin resistance, blood sugar control all of the time. If you're watching on Spotify, make sure to follow me, and I'd love a rating. That really helps me over there. I'm just getting started on Spotify. I've been a YouTuber many, many years. I know the game over here, but Spotify, it's a little bit different. So if you're watching on YouTube, also won't mind if you head over to Spotify and give me a follow and a rating. Thanks so much, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.